Hey guys, and welcome to today's video where I wanted to talk about tank sizes when it comes to leopard geckos. So can a tank be too big? Do they actually use all the space? Does a baby need to start off in a smaller tank? And if you're going to upgrade your gecko's tank, what do you need to do to ensure that your gecko will enjoy it and utilise its new environment? But first, let's look at what the minimum recommended size is for a leopard gecko. So a lot of places will suggest 10 gallon. Now, to me, in my opinion, this should really only be used for a baby, maybe a juvenile if you intend on upgrading soon. But my recommended minimum size would be 20 gallon or 2 foot long by like 1.5 foot deep, 1.5 foot tall. I think that would be absolutely fine for a baby through to an adult, and I think you can start a baby off in that tank. So I often do get asked whether a baby can start off in a bigger tank. And if I got another leopard gecko, like another baby leopard gecko now, I may start it off in one of my 2 foot vivariums, a very simple setup, maybe even just paper towel at first, especially when you're kind of quarantining, you're checking the new animal is eating and pooping well. It's just easier, it's cleaner. It's a more sterile environment and not great for the long term, but definitely good for a new gecko to just check it's doing well. And then I could move it into a bigger tank. But you could technically start off with a bigger tank, as long as you do 4 of the points that I'll mention in a moment when it comes to bigger tanks. But before we do that, how big is too big? So Diego's tank and Gizmo's tank upgrade have a floor space of 3 foot by 2 foot, and I think that's pretty spacious. I think if you have a tank that size, that will definitely do. I have seen people have leopard gecko tanks that are 4 foot long. That's absolutely fine. Similar to what I said about putting a baby in a bigger tank, there are a few tips I'll give you in a moment to ensure your gecko does feel safe and secure and actually uses all that room. So in theory, you could just keep going bigger, as long as you stick to these points. And also remember, in the wild, these animals would hatch out in a territory that would span an area far bigger than a 10-gallon tank. Like, that might even just be their hide in the wild, is like the size of a 10-gallon tank. So keep that in mind. These aren't domesticated animals, they are still wild animals at heart, and would have a far bigger area to explore. This kind of ties into the 4 points that I want to highlight, and it actually reminds me that when I first said I was upgrading Diego's tank, I did get a few comments like people said the tank is too big, a gecko only needs 10 to 20 gallons, or some people had said that they've given a gecko a bigger tank, it didn't use it, didn't like it, so they moved it back to a smaller tank. And as I said, there are 4 big reasons this may have happened. So the first one is a lack of coverage. If you've seen my tank reviews, I go on about this all the time. In my experience, leopard geckos don't tend to do well in wide open spaces. If you lose a leopard gecko in your room, oftentimes you'll find it in a small dark place. So in your shoes or behind a wardrobe in small cracks and crevices, they're not often out in the open. Like if you put your leopard gecko down on the floor right now in a safe, secure area, you may notice that they suddenly get spooked. Even the tamest of my geckos will get spooked. So if we take that information and apply it to a tank, we would find that lots of coverage in the tank, so hides, plants, bits of rock, cork, anything like that, can really help your gecko settle in. So if you took Diego's tank right now, what he's got, we took out everything that's in there and added 1 warm hide, 1 cold hide, and 1 humid hide, it would look incredibly sparse, okay? So I've seen some setups like this, and your gecko probably won't want to move around. It will probably stay in 1 hide, and when it's dark and it's quiet and no one's around, it might move to another hide. Whereas when you have all these different areas, though he does spend a lot of day asleep in one place, in his warm hide, during the evening and nighttime, he does come out and he explores different areas. So he's not scarpering from one hide to another, trying not to get caught. There's enough coverage that he can investigate different areas and still feel safe. So this way, your gecko can feel comfortable exploring and even entering the more open areas, because there are plenty of escape routes if it starts to feel a little bit scared. Now, the second reason a leopard gecko may not do well in a big tank is down to your choice of heat source. Now, I think if you have a small heat mat that goes under the hot hide, yeah, your gecko's probably not going to move much. The rest of the tank is probably a lot colder than that warm hide. Why would they want to move? A ceramic heat emitter might warm up the air a bit, so you could use that with the heat mat or you could use it on its own. In my experience though, you probably guessed it, the deep heat projector energizes them far better. They don't need to be constantly under that heat source in order to have energy. So the way I see it is, if you have the heat mat and the ceramic heat emitter are like charging up your phone, and it takes absolutely ages to charge, and as soon as you unplug that, the battery goes down rather quick. Whereas a projector, in my mind, is like charging your phone up really quickly, and it lasts ages. So that way the Gecko isn't kind of stuck to that heat source. It can get a bit and it can move on, and that helps it be able to explore the cooler areas of the tank. Now there are other heat sources you can use. People use halogens, your solar basking lights, even flood heat lamps. My experience, what I use at the moment, I do like the deep heat projector. The third reason I think it seems like a Gecko isn't using all the space is just down to the sleep cycle of the Leopard Gecko. Now, they are crepuscular, so generally they are more active dawn and dusk, but in my experience they are also very active during the night. And so if you set up a night vision camera, you may actually catch them exploring and utilising the entire space, because when Diego first moved in, I didn't think he was moving, so I set up my camera and I had the camera on the tank for ages because it was so interesting to watch him move about this tank when we weren't around. So especially at the start, if you're only seeing them during the day, maybe early evening, you might completely miss the fact that they are actually moving about the space. The fourth and final reason I think people can come to the conclusion that a bigger tank doesn't work for their Gecko is due to a lack of patience. Now, when Diego first moved into his tank, he was suddenly kind of spooked all the time. Like, he'd only come out when nobody was around. As soon as you'd walk in the room, he'd shoot off. Like, he seemed really scared of us. I didn't see him as much. I couldn't handle him as much. And it's completely understandable that someone would see all that happening and think, oh, this was a bad idea, I need to downgrade them to their smaller tank. They obviously feel more comfortable. But I had to keep in mind that Diego was experiencing a lot of new things. So a new heat source, the deep heat projector is nothing like he'd experienced before with a heat mat. He had live plants in the tank, he had LEDs, a floor space that 2 or 3 times bigger than what he's used to. At the time he'd moved out of the room he'd pretty much lived in his entire life, where he could probably smell the scent of other geckos, and I think that has helped a lot since we've moved. So there was a lot to get used to, but gradually over time, the more and more he got used to the environment, the more comfortable he got, his confidence grew. And step by step, he learnt to trust me again. And now he will just happily hang out at night, come up to the glass, walk about, watch me water his plants. I'll even pop in during the middle of the night and find him the other side of the tank. So it is definitely a waiting game, and you can definitely feel like you've made a mistake, but it's like we've got the old Diego back, but it's so much better because he has so much more room. He just seems so much more vibrant. He can explore. It's really nice to see. So yeah, overall, I believe a 10-gallon tank is far too small. Probably, maybe acceptable for a baby, but if you get the choice, go a little bit bigger. Adults can have 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot tanks, as long as you remember lots of coverage, a decent heat source, keep an eye on their behaviour at night, and be patient. Also remember that you don't have to start off with a massive bioactive tank for your Leopard Gecko. Everyone has a different budget, a different level of experience. I know when I was 13 and getting a Gecko, that would have been incredibly daunting. I was still trying to wrap my head around thermostats and supplements. So it's okay if you start off with a more simple setup, a smaller tank, and you build your way up. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you haven't already, please subscribe. But thank you for watching, and goodbye.